The High Sierra is not a place for the weak of heart or the shallow of breath. It is a jagged world of granite teeth and thin blue air, where the silence is so heavy it feels like a physical weight pressing against your eardrums. People come here to find themselves, but more often than not, the mountains find them first. They call it the range of light, but there are shadows in these canyons that no sun has ever touched. Shadows that wait for a single moment of distraction or a single misstep to swallow a man whole. I have spent years looking into these cases, and the one thing I have learned is that the wilderness does not care about your experience. It does not care about your resume, or how many summers you have spent patrolling its borders. Sometimes the mountain just decides it is finished with you. Randy Morgenson was the man they sent to find the lost. He was a legend in the backcountry of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. A seasonal ranger with 28 years of grit under his fingernails, and the scent of pine needles worked into his skin. He knew the high country better than he knew the lines on his own palms. He was the institutional memory of the park. The guy who knew where every hidden spring bubbled and where the snow lingered longest into July. By 1996, he had spent nearly 3 decades wandering the granite cathedrals of the Sierra. He was not a man who got lost. He was the man who defined what it meant to be found. But in July of 1996, something was different. The air felt stagnant, and the summer heat was a cloying presence, even at 10,000 feet. Randy was going through a divorce. His mind was heavy with the sort of domestic ghosts that follow a man even into the deepest wilderness. He was stationed at the backcountry outpost in the Bench Lake area, a remote stretch of land where the world is nothing but stone and water. On the morning of July 21st, he wrote a note on his cabin door. It said he was headed out on a 3-day patrol toward the Window Peak and Marion Lake areas. He grabbed his pack and his radio, and he walked out into the shimmering heat of the morning. He never came back. When the radio check-in didn't happen, the silence that followed was deafening. The Park Service does not panic easily, but when Randy Morgenson goes silent, you know the earth has shifted. They launched one of the most intensive search and rescue operations in the history of the National Park Service. Helicopters buzzed through the narrow canyons like metallic dragonflies. Elite ground teams moved in a grid across the terrain. They brought in the dogs, the best bloodhounds and cadaver dogs in the state. And here is the first point where the pattern begins to emerge. The dogs found nothing. In a landscape of sharp granite and dusty trails where a footprint should last for days, the animals could not pick up a single scent. It was as if Randy had simply evaporated into the thin mountain air. The searchers looked in every crevice and under every overhanging ledge. They scoured the very areas he had mentioned in his note. The weather turned sour as it often does when someone goes missing in the high country. A sudden storm rolled over the peaks, bringing cold rain and lightning that danced across the ridges. For days the mountains were cloaked in grey mist and the search teams were grounded. They found a set of tracks near a creek, but they couldn't be sure they belonged to him. After weeks of searching with hundreds of personnel and thousands of man-hours, the operation was scaled back. The official consensus was that Randy Morgenson had either walked out of the park to start a new life, or he had ended his own. People wanted to believe he had just grown tired of the world and slipped away. But those who knew him knew better. You do not spend 28 years protecting the land only to leave your bones in a place where no one can find them. 5 years passed. 5 years of silence and speculation. And then in July of 2001, a group of off-trail hikers were moving through a drainage in the gorge of the Bench Canyon area. This was a place that had been searched multiple times during the initial disappearance. They found a tattered piece of fabric caught in the rocks near a small waterfall. Then they found a boot. Then they found a radio. When the investigators arrived, they found what was left of Randy Morgenson. His remains were scattered in a boulder field at the bottom of a steep drainage. But it was the radio that sent a chill through the investigators. The device was switched to the on position. The battery was long dead, of course, but the switch was flipped. It was as if he had been trying to call out until the very end. Or perhaps something else had turned it on. The official report suggests he fell through a snow bridge into the creek and was swept under the boulders. It sounds logical on paper. An accident befalling a tired man in a dangerous place. But the details do not sit right with me. His equipment was found in a way that suggested it had been placed rather than fallen. His shirt was found tucked under a rock. And why did the dogs fail so completely in 1996? Why did the most experienced ranger in the park fall in a place he had traversed 100 times before? And then there is the location. He was found in a drainage that had been cleared by searchers 5 years earlier. They had walked those rocks and looked into those pools and seen nothing but clear water and grey stone. This case fits a chillingly familiar template. An experienced individual vanishing in a high-altitude boulder field near water. The failure of tracking dogs. A sudden change in weather that hampers the search. And finally, the discovery of remains years later in an area that had already been searched with microscopic intensity. We see this in the Cascades and we see it in the Rockies. We see it in the woods of the Northeast. The mountains have a way of hiding things in plain sight until they are ready to give them back. Randy Morgenson spent his life guarding the wilderness, but in the end, the wilderness claimed him as its own. He is just one of many who have stepped off the map and into the grey space between the rocks. The radio was on, but nobody was listening. And the mountains are still not talking. You have to understand the mind of a backcountry ranger. These men and women do not see the wilderness as a playground. They see it as a living, breathing machine. A machine with teeth. Randy Morgenson was the grease in that machine for 28 years. 28 years of reading, the wind, and the track, and the slope. He was the man the Park Service sent when others got lost. He was the one who knew where the shadows pooled and where the water ran thin. And yet, in the late summer of 1996, he simply stepped off the edge of the known world, leaving behind nothing but a half-empty bottle of Gatorade and a silence that lasted for 5 long years. When they finally found him in 2001, it was not because the mountain gave him up. It was because a fluke of geology and light allowed a searcher to see what had been invisible to hundreds of eyes before him. The location was a steep drainage in the Window Peak area. A place of jagged granite and cold fast water that tears at anything trying to find a foothold. But as the investigators picked through the debris, they found things that did not fit the narrative of a simple accidental fall. They found a tattered piece of fabric caught in the rocks near a small waterfall. Then they found a boot. Then they found a radio. And then they found what was left of the man who had spent his life guarding these very peaks. The radio was the detail that broke the case, and the investigators' hearts simultaneously. It was a standard-issue Park Service radio. Heavy and black and built to survive a war. When the investigator picked it up from the grey silt, his thumb brushed against the side. The switch was in the on position. In the quiet of that high-altitude drainage, the realization hit like a physical blow. The battery had died years ago, but the switch was flipped. Imagine the scene in the dark of a mountain night. A man broken and pinned beneath the cold weight of the Sierra Nevada. Reaching out with a trembling hand to click that switch. Waiting for a voice that never came. Or perhaps worse. Imagine something else turning that dial, just to see if it would make a sound. The official report will tell you that Randy Morgenson fell through a snow bridge into the creek and was swept under the boulders. It is a clean explanation. It is a logical explanation. It allows the Park Service to file the paperwork and move on. But the details do not sit right with those of us who have spent our lives looking into the cracks of these stories. His equipment was found in a way that suggested it had been placed rather than fallen. His shirt was found tucked carefully under a rock, as if it were being saved for later. As if he had intended to come back for it. Or as if someone was laying out the pieces of a puzzle they didn't want solved. And then there is the matter of the dogs. In 1996, they brought in the best tracking teams in the country. Dogs that could find a scent on a wet rock in a hurricane. They searched that exact drainage. They walked those boulder fields. They sniffed the very air where Morgenson lay decaying. And they found nothing. Not a whimper. Not a scratch. They acted as if the area was a blank space on the map. A sensory vacuum where the smell of a human being simply did not exist. We see this over and over again in these cases. The failure of the biological senses we trust the most. As if the mountain has a way of masking its kills from the world of the living. Why did the most experienced ranger in the park fall in a place he had traversed 100 times before? Randy knew those rocks. He knew the way the snow bridges softened in the afternoon sun. He was not a tourist in shorts and flip-flops. He was the master of the terrain. Yet he was found in a drainage that had been cleared by searchers 5 years earlier. They had walked those rocks and looked into those pools and seen nothing but clear water and grey stone. It was as if he had been deposited there after the search was over. A grim gift returned to the surface once the world had stopped looking. This case fits a chillingly familiar template that we see across the national parks of North America. An experienced individual vanishing in a high-altitude boulder field near water. The total failure of tracking dogs to lock onto a scent. A sudden change in weather that hampers the initial search. And finally, the discovery of remains years later in an area that had already been searched with microscopic intensity. It happened to Jared Atadero in Colorado. It happened to others in the Cascades and the Rockies. We see it in the dense woods of the Northeast where the green canopy swallows people whole. The mountains have a way of hiding things in plain sight until they are ready to give them back. They are not malicious. They are just hungry and indifferent. Randy Morgenson spent his life guarding the wilderness. He walked the high passes and spoke the language of the granite. But in the end, the wilderness claimed him as its own. He is just one of many who have stepped off the map and into the grey space between the rocks. The space where logic fails and the shadows move when you are not looking. The radio is on, but nobody was listening. And the mountains are still not talking. When you walk into the high country, you are entering a world that does not belong to you. You are a guest in a house that has no doors and no mercy. You might have the best gear and the most experience, and a badge that says you are in charge. But when the granite decides it is time for you to stay, there is no switch you can flip that will bring you home. The silence of the Sierra is a heavy thing. And it is a silence that eventually consumes everything. Even the men who think they know it best.